We now come to our Bible study time, and this week we're going to be tackling the whole section, chapter 10, verses 32 to 52, because the bishop will be preaching on a different section. So let's just jump right into chapter 10, verses 32 to 34. They were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. They were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. He told the 12 again and began to tell them what was to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit upon him and flog him and kill him, and after 3 days he will rise again." Now, we have been using the great artwork of Pastor Steve Thomason throughout this Bible study journey. And on his website, he has this to say about this opening section, which I think gets it just right. He says, notice the first word, see. It seems this is the point of Mark. A key framing story happens back in Mark chapter 8, verses 22 to 26, when Jesus heals a blind man. It takes 2 tries. At first, the man can see, but people seem like trees to him. Jesus touches him again, and everything becomes clear. The Gospel of Mark is presenting Jesus as the Messiah who must suffer, die, and rise again. This is the 3rd time he tells this to his disciples. They don't see it. One of my favorite things about this passage and about that Mark 8 passage about that blind man is that even though Jesus has to tell the disciples 3 times and has to attempt 2 times to heal the blind man, he never gives up on them. When we think about how many times we screw up, how many times we get off track, how many times we've simply not seen things the right way, what comes to mind is that Gospel of Matthew question, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. How many times will God come back for us? And don't start trying to do the math on if you're getting close to that 70 times 7, 490 number. It means God is always going to come back to you and try again. And right after I get done saying that, the disciples try to show you how far the patience of Jesus and God can be stretched by asking Jesus, after Jesus just got done telling them he was going to sacrifice himself for them, asking Jesus to be their own personal Jesus, or own personal genie. Rather. Take a look at Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do whatever we ask of you. And in other Gospels in this section, they have the mother of James and John kind of forcing them to do that. But here we have the disciples, warts and all, asking this rather inappropriate question. Continuing on, though, and Jesus said to them, What is it you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They replied, We are able. Then Jesus said to them, The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those whom it has been prepared. When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. That sounds a bit like our prayers at times, right? Jesus, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. We know what's best for our lives, and we demand that God do exactly that. Not always knowing what we're asking. Not always realizing the terror we are rushing toward until in hindsight we say something like, sure glad God didn't grant that prayer. We couldn't have a more clear-cut case of that life-saving prayer unanswered moment than the disciples asking to be on the right and left of Jesus in glory. Now, some people talk about these right and left seats being heavenly ones. One seat potentially being filled by God the Father, as you think about how the Trinity might be sitting. But we just went through a section about Jesus' sacrifice, the cross. And then we lead into a section about not being tyrants, but servants. Everything I read in this section tells me what it would mean to be on Jesus' right and left in his glory. They would be on his right and left on a cross. That place reserved for those two criminals, one who mocks Jesus and one who understands that sacrificial moment better than anyone. There's a small misunderstanding, though, that regularly happens with this section when Jesus mentions that cup that he will drink and that baptism he will be baptized with. He's probably not talking about communion. The cup is most likely the cup referred to throughout the Old Testament, namely the cup of wrath. And the word baptism is a word that means submerged. And no, I'm not going to get into a full immersion baptism conversation right now. But what this sentence from Jesus is truly getting at would probably be more correctly translated as, can you bear to go through the terrible, wrathful experience I have to go through? Can you face being submerged in hatred and pain and death as I have to be? For disciples who are demanding the best seats, it's clear they don't get it and don't want to be a part of that. Jesus is trying to show them what being a disciple truly looks like. It's not earthly glory, earthly success, but true glory looks like this. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. And now let's look at that closing section, chapter 10, verses 46 to 52. Then Jesus came to Jericho, and he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Pastor Steve Thomason makes this connection about Jesus coming to Jericho, as it's a famous city you may remember from past biblical readings. Pastor Thomason said, "Jericho seems to be a critical city in the Jesus story. Another Joshua, Jesus is the Greek form of Joshua, remember, encountered this city first in his march into the Promised Land. Walls came crashing down that day through faith and obedience, not war, not might. Perhaps Jericho is the place where we get to see the tone of the battle. Jesus encounters a blind man. Notice the parallel between Jesus' conversations with James and John and his conversation with Bartimaeus. They all ask Jesus to do something for them. Jesus responds, "What do you want me to do?" James and John want glory and power. Bart wants to see it. I think Bart gets it. Now he sees, and the disciples are still in the dark. The main battle we face on a daily basis is seeing things, seeing the world, seeing our neighbor in the right way. And part of it is that we as humans want the things that James and John want: wealth, comfort, security. But those things don't last. And they're not what we actually need. What we need is to see. And when we see correctly and act on that correct seeing to lift up one another through the kingdom of God, it will then become a reality, that kingdom of God. And we will finally get that comfort and security when all of our neighbors are living abundant life, not just a few. But to get it, to get there, we have to serve. We have to sacrifice, which are not always the things we want to do, but it is the way. We'll stop there for our Bible study and pick up next week. We're now going to be joined by our bishop for this synod, Bishop Jake, as he gives the sermon for this Sunday. Thank you for joining me for the Bible study.